Hey Knights! So this is chapter 3 of the To Serve and Protect, or To Protect and Serve. Heh, it's a tongue twister. Alright, so chapter 3, Campfire Stories. I started back towards the newly lit campfire. It was roughly the same area where I had woken, or I guess found myself in. The other man by the fire, I suppose if I was buying into this whole fellowship thing, and God help me, but I was, that would make him Boromir, was turning my vest over in his hands and examining it. I veered my path for his side of the fire. What do you think it is, Pip? It sure is heavy. Not sure, Mary. It's just metal, isn't it? Not even sharp. My eyes darted down at the two hobbits as I walked behind them towards Boromir. One of the hobbits was shaking something much too large for his hands. My eyes widened in recognition, and I swooped down over them, snatching my Glock away from the one, now trying to hand it to the other. Jesus H. Christ, I swore. This isn't a toy. It's a weapon, a very dangerous one, I yelled at the hobbits. They immediately shrunk away from me to huddle over by the other hobbits. I wasn't sure where my Glock had come from, but remembered that I'd still been holding the pistol when I'd been shot. I had probably dropped it on the ground when I was imitating a fish out of water trying to breathe. I knew by the weight that it was still loaded, and remembered that I haven't even fired a shot at the warehouse. Once assured that the gun was undamaged and still unfired, I replaced it in my hip holster, thanking my lucky stars that they hadn't managed to accidentally fire the thing. I also took the time to put my 40 back in my ankle holster. I looked up at the puzzled and, in the case of the hobbits, scared expressions of everyone. I'm sorry for yelling and scaring you guys. I apologize to the hobbits. That's a very dangerous weapon where I'm from. And just where is it that you hail from, my lady? Boromir curiously asked. I jerked my head towards Aragorn. I already told him, but I'll say it again. It's Justland, not Lady anything. I ran my left hand over my head and through the wisps of my hair that I'd pulled out of my ponytail. I lived in Chicago, but I doubt that any of you have heard of that city. Their blank stares were answer enough. Well, shit, I muttered to myself. Boromir's brow furrowed as he frowned. Must you use such oaths? I may not recognize many of your words, but I recognize your tone. It is not befitting of a woman, whether you wish to be called a lady or not. A feather could have knocked me over. A soldier dressing me down for my language? Who'd have thought? Marines had never been known for our sophistication. I apologize, I sputtered. Guess I've spent too many years as a Marine and then working with cops. A puzzled look filled Boromir's face. Marine, he repeated, the word twisting funnily in his mouth. I paused, trying to figure out the best way to explain what a Marine was. I finally settled for simplicity. Marines are part of a branch from my people's military. I was a soldier, I'd guess you'd say. The word tasted sour in my mouth. A Marine was a Marine. We weren't the army to call ourselves soldiers, but it was easier to keep things simple for now. Boromir looked skeptical. You are a soldier? What's a cop? One of the hobbits added. I could already see the whole female soldier sock sitting in, so I decided to cut it off quickly. Yes, a soldier. My people learned that women can be just as deadly, if not deadlier. I answered with a grin. Being in the military isn't for most women, I'll grant you, but we never forbid them for proving their worth in the ranks. Discourage, dissuade, and downright make it difficult as hell, but not forbid. Not anymore, or at last. I turned towards the hobbit. A cop is... I trailed off, trying to dredge up memories of the couple of times I'd read Lord of the Rings several years ago. Did Middle-earth have anything like police force? How the hell am I going to explain this? Well, we protect and serve, I finished lamely. What do you protect, and whom do you serve? Aragorn asked, as he stepped near the fire with several skinned rabbits. One of the hobbits came forward with a pack and began pulling out pots and pans as he took the rabbits. Probably Samwise, I told myself. I stared into the fire for a moment and then crossed my arms and picked at the dry blood on my sleeve as I thought. Well, my city, Chicago, has rules and laws their citizens must live by. And when they don't, cops like me are trained to enforce the laws by arresting the offenders and bringing them before a judge where a group of their peers decide a punishment for their crime. I looked up at Aragorn again. To answer your question, we protect the people, we serve the people. A noble calling, even for a woman, a deep voice rumbled. I glanced over to see the dwarf, Gimli, nod to me in appreciation. I decided to ignore the even for a woman part that had my hackles up. Things were different in this time and place where women were concerned. For the most part it is, I agreed. Gandalf, are we going to march again all night? The hobbit I was beginning to think was Pippin asked. He looked a bit younger than I'd expected, but then I knew the hobbits were all older than their appearances I was used to. Gandalf chuckled and took his pointed hat off as he sat near the fire and gestured for me to sit near him. I nodded and took his offer. No, young Peregrine, we shall not march more tonight. We made good time last night and will start early and push hard again tomorrow night. For tonight, I thought we could hear our guest's tale. He then proceeded to point around the fire and introduce the fellowship. Minus an elf, that is, who was still absent. Not that I minded. I was startled by Gandalf's explanation to Pippin, and finally remembered that in the book they had traveled by night. I don't want to mess up your plans or slow you down, I tried. Gandalf shook his head. We had traveled a fair distance when we get an early start this afternoon. We shall make up for lost time tomorrow night. It was of more importance to see to your health. You need a good meal and rest, I would wager. Now please, tell us how you came to be so strangely clad this far south in Holland. I scratched my brain mentally, but couldn't recall any Holland. But then, I'd always been more interested in the action sequences of the book than in the details of any story. I drew one knee up to my chest and wrapped my left arm around it as I started talking to the gathered group. What I was unbelievably startled to believe was that the actual Fellowship of the Rings. I told them briefly about my job, and then about the raid at the warehouse. It was unbelievable how many times I had to stop to explain various things and what my strange words meant. I glossed over what the warehouse we were raiding actually was, not wanting to explain what a brothel was. For all I knew, they didn't even exist in all of Middle-earth, though somehow I doubted it. It was the oldest profession, after all. Finally, I had gotten to the part where I'd come to the middle of a forest with my breath knocked out. Your tale seems fantastical and far-fetched, my lady. Forgive me, Lane, Boromir commented, stroking his chin. How right to believe that you are truly from another place, even another world, as you claim, as vastly different from this as the one you describe. You think I'm lying? I asked, one brow raised. I did not say that, merely that you might be mistaken after suffering an injury as you have, Boromir returned. I felt the urge to rise up and snap back at him in anger, but Gandalf placed a calming hand on my arm, and I could feel his magic sizzling where he touched me, and I was unnerved by the feeling. Now I fought the urge to jerk away from him instead. Gandalf seemed to sense it and slowly removed his hand. Shaking my head to clear it, I turned back to Boromir and gestured to the vest lying forgotten near his feet. Toss me that vest. Grabbing it from the air after he'd thrown it, I laid it across my lap, pulled my jackknife from my pocket. Using it, I pried the bullet from the dented armor plate in the vest and held it up. This was the bullet that girl shot with me. I held the mangled bullet up, and then tossed it to Boromir, who examined it carefully with Aragorn leaning in to look as well. I pulled my Glock out again and removed the clip and a bullet from it as well. The calibers were different, but they'd get the idea. This is what they look like before they're fired, I explained, tossing the bullet across to Aragorn. They leaned together to examine the two bullets, while all the others, save for Gandalf and the still missing elf, gathered close as well. Even Sam stopped stirring the stew he'd been preparing as I talked to go look. Obviously, that bullet from my vest had been fired at an extraordinary speed and hit something quite solid to become so compact and mangled. Your wound did seem unlikely, as I had seen before. It didn't seem made by an arrow or blade, Aragorn admitted. What of her knowledge of our friendship? Legolas suddenly asked. I jumped up in surprise, not even noticing when he'd come up behind me. I managed to not grump for my gun, but just barely. I edged part way around the fire, trying not to be too obvious about putting space between us. Thinking quickly, I answered their curious look. Well, I know about it because in my world, your quest is an old tale, one known to many. I'd considered telling them it was a vision or something else, but decided to stick as close to the truth as possible. Frodo spoke for the first time, suddenly looking hopeful. Then you know how our journey shall end? I suddenly felt guilty, and like I'd made the wrong choice. Raising their hope hadn't been my intention. I should have thought of something else. Yes, but I'm afraid there's nothing of what's to come that I can divulge. I kept a close eye on Legolas. Elf or fairy, I was nervous by his very fey-like appearance. Ouch, you cannot tell if the future based on some story you were told as a child, Gimli scoffed. I shrugged, hoping that maybe he was right. Just because I'd read those books once upon a time in my world didn't mean that was what would happen in this world. I'd seen enough to know other worlds besides the one I'd known existed out there. The land of the fairies, for one, though I'd never traveled there or to any other world. Until now, that is. But a world where the events that were happening had been narrated as a completed story in another world? That seems far-fetched. Or maybe it was just wishful thinking. But you know our fellowship? A secret fellowship, Gandalf reminded. What do you know? I remember something my mother's mother had cautioned. She had been an oracle of sorts, human as far as I know. Just because I might know something of what's to come doesn't mean I should tell others. People don't do well knowing what's going to happen. It had driven my grandmother crazy. I felt a sad smile tug at my lips. I was told once that if you knew you might step out the door and get hurt, you would probably just stay home and try to be safe. But fate was just as likely to strike you dead for messing with it, I shrugged. Seems safer not to fool around with. Perhaps very wise words, Gandalf agreed, looking thoughtful. So we're just supposed to take your word on how you know these things? Gimli pressed. Do you really think if I learned what I know by evil means, or that I'd had nefarious intentions, I'd have hung around here and wounded and tell you that I know anything at all about your fellowship? I asked, picking at the dried blood on my shirt again. It would seem to me that if the lady truly had ill intentions, she would have devised a more plausible story than this, Boromir kindly suggested. Thanks, I think, I replied with a frown. Sam had started passing out plates of stew. When he got to me, he stopped and looked at where I'd been picking blood from my stained shirt. Begging your pardon, missus, but I think I can find you an extra shirt in one of the packs that wouldn't be too awfully large. I smiled gratefully as I took my plate. That would be wonderful, Master Gammy. He blushed and quickly turned to go where the packs were piled. When he came back a few minutes later with some cloth and a bundle, I was just finishing my plate of stew. I handed it back to him, saying, Thanks, that was delicious. You're finished already? Sam asked, clearly shocked. Now it's my turn to blush a little. Sorry, you're taught to eat fast if you want a meal at all in the military. Never know when the next one's coming, I told him as I took the bundle of clothes from him. Boromir laughed as he finished his own plate. It is ever the same in Gondor. Perhaps you were a soldier after all. Sounds awful, Pippin muttered to himself. I forced a smile and opened the bundle Sam brought. There was a shirt wrapped up in a heavy cloak. It gets mighty cold at night. Figured you'd like a nice cloak to keep warm. Though it'd be warmer if we had another fur-lined one, like the ones what Mr. Elrond gave us. He looked sheepish. You're right welcome to use mine if you'd like. Sam would obviously be small for me, but the two men both started the vice offers of their own cloaks. I cut them off. It's no problem, guys. This one's more than enough. I've lived in climates colder than this, and Chicago can definitely get colder than this in the winter. I stood with my bundle to go changed, and was shocked motionless when they all stood as well. Although Mary had to nudge Pippin. You guys really don't have to do that, I told them, my cheeks tingling with embarrassment. They all started to protest, but I stopped them. Look, as long as I'm still wearing pants, stop the whole lady treatment. I turned away, muttering. I've never seen men jump to their feet so fast just 'cause I stood up. You think they were a bunch of buck pirates and someone had yelled mail call. There were a few muffled laughs as I made my way back towards the stream from earlier. The shirt looked like it would be a little big, but I was grateful to get out of my ruined shirt and into a clean one. After I'd cleaned up a bit again and changed into the white linen shirt, I remained kneeling by the stream. I was surprised by the ease with which I was accepted this turn of events. True, I'd never lived a quiet, altogether human life, but shouldn't I be more upset about ending up in some strange world? But I realized as I knelt by the stream that I'd never been so relaxed before. I was normally a constant struggle to keep other people's thoughts out of my head, so I didn't go crazy. Here, it was effortless. Perhaps it was so easy here because there was only a handful of thoughts to contend for miles and miles. I couldn't say. I almost dared to think that here I could live without the constant fear that people would be freaking out by me and thinking I was crazy, because I slipped up and heard their thoughts. I'd had enough of that as a child. They think you know the future. Yeah, not crazy at all, I laughed aloud. Okay, maybe I'd never have a chance at a normal, boring life. I got up and started back towards the campsite. The tall leaf figure leaning against the tree startled me enough that I'd half drawn my handgun before I realized it was Legolas watching me. He raised placid hands. Forgive me, I did not intend to startle you. None should wander alone in these dark times. I forced myself to replace my gun and breathe. I was really getting sick of being startled all the time. It's fine, I told him, edging away from him towards the other. Why are you so frightened of me? What are these fairies that you fear? He quietly asked. There was only faint bruising around his eyes and nose now. Elves apparently healed very quickly, just like fairies. You're not still pissed off at me for busting your nose, are you? I asked, instead of answering his questions. He was momentarily confused, but seemed to guess at my words. Nay, and I apologize for reacting so poorly before. I am afraid it has been some time since I have felt the bite of a broken nose. I nodded and edged nearer to the low light of the fire. Fairies must be creatures wholly unlike elves, he observed. I don't know any elves. But these fairies must not be good creatures, he continued to comment. No. I started to turn away, but a hand lightly grabbed my elbow. I shoved his hands away and hissed, Don't touch me. He looked startled, but removed his hand and stepped back. I am not one of these creatures. I mean you no harm. Just leave me alone, and I'll leave you alone. He looked at me blankly, then tilted his head down towards me as he said, I have apologized to you for my behavior, yet you have not returned the favor and apologized for breaking my nose. Whether you speak it or not, these fairies have done you harm. But please do not judge me or all elves by some race foreign to this world, Elena. And then he turned away and disappeared in the shadows of the tree line. I returned to the dying fire in stunned silence. I mutely nodded when Aragon said I should get some rest. Drawing my borrowed cloak around myself, I sat propped against a nearby tree and closed my eyes. I doubt I'd sleep much. I really did anymore. But I had lots of things to think about. But I kept turning over my head how he'd known my full name. I'd only told Aragon. Ooh, okay, that's a cool twist. Yeah, so that's chapter 3. Peace out, knights.